Hey, this is Jun Shima. I'm a filmmaker and cinematographer, and I am also an assistant professor at the New School University in New York City. I'm currently based in Tokyo, Japan. These days, I work mostly on commercial and documentary films. I lived in Brooklyn, New York for 13 years and came back to Tokyo due to the pandemic. While I was there, I met Jamie and started working for Story Keep as a cinematographer. I had opportunity to travel to Minneapolis, New Orleans, Montreal, and all around New York State with Jamie to capture great family moments and interviews. One of my favorite projects was filming a family spanning four generations based in Brooklyn, from children to grandfather who emigrated to the United States from Europe in the 1920s. I've always been interested in generational stories. I felt so honored to be connecting those family dots into a huge collective of family history and memories. If this sounds interesting for your family or when you sport, be in touch with us.
Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of Story Keep and your host for this podcast. First, let me say how delighted I am to have you join us for the show. This is a place where we have uncommon conversations about things that matter deeply to most of us, the people we love, and the purpose that we give to our own lives and legacies. Our mission at Story Keep is to capitalize on the power of story for the profound good in families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, creating personal films and private podcasts that celebrate a family's shared narrative. Our work is designed to deepen connections. My conversations on this show center around two questions. The first is, whose life story from your own family would you most want to see documented? And the second is, what are you, as a person and as a professional, hoping to create and leave behind? Today, I'm honored to welcome Mark Chassman to the show. My husband Pete and I met Mark at the Southeastern Family Office Forum in Atlanta. We loved Mark's energy from the word go. I've since learned that Mark was employee number 43 at Facebook, where he worked as the VP of advertising sales. He also worked at AOL in media sales, and he is the co-founder of Transform Capital and the Social Leadership Academy. He specializes in turning ambitious visions into actionable results. And don't we all need that? His passion is on innovation and leadership development, and he has a big, big heart for equipping the next generation of socially minded entrepreneurs. Today, Mark is speaking about his late father-in-law, Ray Clemons. Ray was once a professional football player for the Green Bay Packers, which my dad, may he rest in peace, would be utterly delighted to learn, since the Packers were practically a religion in my household growing up. I really love the way that Mark talks about his father-in-law, Ray. His take on his own legacy is one worth noting and emulating. All right, settle in and join me for this intimate and thought-provoking conversation with Mark Chassman as we explore the enduring influence of his father-in-law and the legacy he is building for himself. And I think you will too. So, Mark, I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. Number one, because I loved when we had the chance to meet before and your beautiful life energy. And number two, because I believe you were the first guest who has chosen an in-law, not a blood relative as the person that you would talk about. So kudos.
Thank you.
So welcome to the show and thanks for joining me in this conversation.
Well, I'm really looking forward, Jamie, to talking to you. I feel like, just to have a conversation with somebody that you have had a conversation with and felt positive energy, it kind of helps bring the best of others to the fore. I'm excited to kind of be here with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and just to give our listeners like a little background, we both attended the Southeastern Family Office Forum in Atlanta. And then we both were put into we were invited. We had the great opportunity to go to a dinner put on by Blue Trust. And we had a great time. And they chose an excellent restaurant and it was super fun. And I'm really glad we got to talk there. And so you chose, when we asked the question, whose life story from your own family, what person would you want to have documented on film? You said your father-in-law,
Yes, I did.
Ray Clemons.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about Ray and your life with him. He has now passed, but tell me how he came into your life
Yes.
and a little bit about Ray.
Well, it's an interesting story. It starts with obviously me meeting my now wife of 35 years, my beautiful wife Joanne, and living in literally two different worlds in terms of how we were brought up. I was brought up growing up in the suburbs of Los Angeles. My dad kind of in the entertainment business, and my wife grew up on a ranch in Sacramento, although same state, kind of very different environments and very different cultures.
Yeah.
She, the youngest of 8 children, me, the eldest of 3. Her with a family that had an orientation of faith in their lives, and me being pretty much agnostic to all things related to spirit.
Good beginning.
Oh, yes. Interesting beginning, right? Like other sides of the tracks, I guess. 2 sides of the tracks. And when I started falling for his daughter, that moment when it became, hey, I want you to meet my family, became one of those very tumultuous moments in my mind because here I am, again, opposites, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Coming into meet her family. And then in the way that you think about as a young man who wants to, court his daughter, thinking, how am I going to win this guy?
Right. How can I make a good impression?
Yeah, right.
What did you know about him from the stories that she had said? Do you remember like what you were anticipating?
Yes. Well, again, how guys tend to think about what he was doing for a living. Like, so his background in the doing for a living or in his career was he was a Navy pilot. He was a professional football player for the Green Bay Packers. He became a football coach. And much of that was like, okay, this is a man. He's living on a ranch, right? So
Yeah.
he's out working with his hands. He's building fences. He's taking care of cattle. He's, a man's kind of a thing, the way I might, kind of put it in that context. And I would look at myself and think I'm anything but what he is.
Wow. How did you conceptualize yourself? He's the all-American football star that was in the military, and now he's out being a cowboy. Oh my gosh, it's hard to beat. I mean, you have to be Buzz Aldrin.
Yeah, I was actually, it was again, the story gets uglier. I was 27 years old when I met my wife and then her father. And I was started out on a career path that was floundering. I started out in Hollywood thinking I wanted to be a talent agent. And I came to a place that I realized that this wasn't for me when I thought that this was, my be all end all path.
Yeah.
And I was then living at home, working a job that was paying me, less than minimum wage. And this is when I had the opportunity, right, to kind of meet my wife. She was living in Sacramento. I was living in Los Angeles. We met initially over the phone, doing business together kind of on a daily basis. And then when it came to, meet face to face, this is who showed up. A lost young man trying to find his way saying, pick me.
Right. So were you feeling insecure, or had she said, no, my parents are cool people, my dad is such and such, or were you genuinely a little bit petrified at the idea?
Oh, I was generally petrified because it wasn't just meeting her dad, it was meeting her family. And it happened to be at the ranch, a family gathering where, her 4 brothers, again, she's the youngest of 8 children. So her 4 older brothers, her 3 older sisters, obviously thinking they're very protective, I would imagine, of their youngest daughter or sister, is probably, going, what is this? Who's this guy that you're bringing into our world? So, yeah, I think that if I could define it in going back and putting myself in those shoes, I was petrified. So, yes.
So when you showed up, was he in fact putting like a fence into the ground, or what's your first memory of Ray?
I remember, yes, you drive up a long dusty dirt road. And I remember there was a fire burning. They had like, I don't know if it was they were burning, whatever, refuse or weeds from the, from the garden or whatever it is. Or they were, having a campfire with marshmallow roasting. but I remember that.
Huh.
And I remember, meeting him, having a strong grip, very calloused hands, just kind of a strong grip, and kind of looked me in the eyes. Nice to meet you, young man, kind of very young manny. Yeah, I mean, again, what I'm going to talk about is his embodiment of strength, how it started when I first met him, kind of in that context that you're now seeing him.
Yeah.
And then how I understood strength in a different way.
Let's talk about that. So I suppose that happened over time. And are you talking about an emotional, spiritual, mental strength? Like, is that what you're saying? Like you sort of had this poster.
Yeah. I mean, mind, body, spirit, like kind of what I learned through his modeling of what it means to be a man and the way that he was modeling that for me was really the embodiment of strength. And in the context, the way I think about it is kind of the mind and the body, and then the spirit side, which, like I said, was not even a component of thought for me at the time that I came into their world. And then how I learned from his modeling how to try and incorporate that traits of character into my life.
So let's talk about one of those pivotal moments.
Yes.
Was it a moment where he clearly instructed something to you, or you observed him?
All observational, really. There was never really the let me sit down and teach you some things, young man. It was more about modeling through the opportunities that I had to be with him, and then seeing how others were being influenced in positive ways by his mind and his body and his spirit. And it was kind of, I decided to find it as the embodiment of true strength.
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just his sons. How his sons, 4 boys, and then talk about the girls, really honored and revered their father in terms of who he was in the family. I could see how, again, through intent or through modeling, how my wife's older brother, Mike, was really kind of taking on that sense of responsibility, of learning all he could from his father, knowing in his mind that, kind of there needs to be a patriarch of this family to keep it together, to keep it flourishing, to keep it moving in positive directions. And I need to, take what I can and learn what I can from my father to be that person. Like I said, when I met Joanne's father, it wasn't very long after that he, became sick. He had multiple myeloma and then went through the phase of being this strong physical pillar of a man to not that, but yet always representing that strength in mind and spirit in ways that were, again, amazing. And then you can see how the sons, the brothers, had adopted that into their lives and how they were thinking about, modeling that with their children, with the people that they were engaged with. The way that I think about him is he was truly, and this is kind of how it bridges to Mark, a mentor and a coach to men who were, in a lot of cases, fatherless. And I use the less meaning not that they didn't have a father, but they might have had fathers who really didn't work at fatherhood. And he really modeled that in the way that you could see him interact with his family and others, coach, mentor, football coach. There's that aspect of it. But this is before I knew him. I understand that they had on this ranch, they would invite, in essence, fatherless men to their ranch, and it became a camp. They called the camp or the ranch the 6 Bar C Ranch. And that was where the boys and the father and obviously Joanne and her sisters were there to kind of nurture and encourage and build relationships with men, many of them young men who were, I say, fatherless, had fathers who were maybe not so engaged in their lives in positive ways.
Would you consider yourself having come into his life and him into yours as a fatherless, or where were you coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I love my father. My father's still here today. He's 89 years old. And my father has been, again, early on in my life, he was very much a model for me in terms of what it meant to work with excellence. There was a side that I, think about a lot now in terms of legacy that is really valuable and important to me. It's how do we steward all of our gifts, everything that we've been presented with, our time, our talents, our resources, and how do we do it in a way that impacts people's lives in a meaningful way? And again, intention around that, kind of my father-in-law modeled that with intention. My dad less so. Doesn't make him lesser man, just makes him a different man. And which is why I'm saying, from my father-in-law, really what I learned was what it meant to embody strength in the mind and the body and the spirit part of things that wasn't all three of those components being modeled as in my upbringing.
Yeah. So my guess here would be that if we had had the chance to propose to Ray to have his life story documented,
Yes,
would he have been a bit reticent to do that?
very much so. He was a very humble man.
Yeah.
And that's why I said there wasn't a lot of, demonstrative approaches to saying, get this kid, I want to sit you down and teach you something and you need to follow this and here are my rules. And it wasn't that. It was just how he went about doing life. And in his doing of life, I say kind of had this spirit of strength. And yet kind of what I saw was a calmness and conviction about it, but it was never kind of overt. Things like football, a sport that is very much about competition and, pummeling the people across the line there. He always seemed like he was in control of his wholeness of who he was.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was being an influence on people's lives.
What would you have wanted to ask him about if you had had the opportunity to have a third party or yourself do an interview with him? What would you have wanted to ask him now? There's been so much time that's actually passed, right, since his death. And you've come more into yourself and your own expression of, being a man. What would you have wanted to ask him?
Yeah, I think about, again, now being 63 years old and thinking about legacy and relationship. Like, what do you want to leave as nuggets that continue to grow in the hearts and minds and spirits of your children, as an example? Again, to verbalize, right? What would you want that to be? And so I think that would probably be the question, Ray. What would you want to verbalize out loud that you would desire for your children, your heirs, and your children's children, and your children's children, thinking about it kind of in that generational, right, wisdom being passed on? What would you want that message to be? Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any silly questions that you would want to ask him?
The interesting part is, and was a kind of a very intimate moment, when he was kind of close to his passing, he enjoyed having a bowl of ice cream, like on an everyday kind of closer to the end. He was a very fit man, and, you'd think that he wouldn't be eating things like desserts and snacks, but he had this love of ice cream. And so he asked if his wife, Rosemary, my mother-in-law, would get him a bowl of ice cream. And then he asked if Mark would like one too. And so I said, yeah, I'd love one too. So she brought back 2 bowls of ice cream, and, he's lying in his bed kind of, in a lot of pain and all that. But we were both just sitting there, eating ice cream together. And, the conversation was just more about, right, kind of stuff going on in the lives of his children. But it was an intimate moment because here we are, like, sitting together, me sitting on his deathbed with him, kind of sharing a bowl of ice cream. And I just remember how, like, here's, like I said, this man who I look at as the embodiment of strength, kind of, right, in the way that my vision, all my experiences with him. And we're just, sharing a bowl of ice cream, kind of in those moments. So yeah, it was fun.
Beautiful image. It sounds like he has been an important influence in how you've decided you want to be in the world and how you want to be a dad. What are the through lines that you see in the life that you're building and your purposeful work that go back to what you took from your relationship with him?
Yeah, I think that, different, right? We're different people, personalities. Again, the gift part, right? What is it that we show up with? I'm trying to be very intentional, and my wife and I together as a team, about how we impart on our children the things that are important to this family in carrying forth, not, again, this idea that wealth is a financial construct, but that wealth is a construct of who we are and what we stand for. And in that intention, it's having conversations and dialogues about this is who we are, this is what we stand for, in a way that is relevant to each of our children's journey. So we have a 32-year-old who's married, a 27-year-old boy, Tanner. My oldest daughter's name is Alyssa, and my youngest daughter's 22. She's Emma. And so there's 5 years between each of them. And they're in different life stages. And so in understanding their life stage and understanding what's important to them, and then trying to be the best that we can be at imparting upon these things that we care about in a way that's, in relation to who they are and where they are in their lives, is really important. And so there's a lot of intention around that. And when I bring the part of the spirit in that, it's not in the way that we might think about religion. It's in the way that we think about who are we outside of self, like who are we in the world, and how do we bring more to the world than just kind of the things that are the day-to-day of self. And so we try and bring that to the fore, because I think that he modeled that. He went through his career. I said, he's a head coach. Well, his last part of his career was he was a fisherman. Literally, he had a fishing boat. He moved to the Mendocino coast, or they had a place in the Mendocino coast. Every day he would get up and he would go out and fish, and he would bring crab and salmon in, and, we would all share it. But he spent his time there with men, just kind of having one-on-one conversations. His days of trying to provide, per se, were past him. But where he was where can I go and bring me in relationship with other men, and do it in a context that is around something that I enjoy, as opposed to my work and career kind of a thing. And so it was interesting, those later parts of his life where he was a fisherman, and after his fishing day, he'd be sitting down with the guy on the hill talking about, stuff and imparting things on them. I just saw that as something I wanted to do with intention with our children.
And if I've tracked you well enough in what you've also done in your professional life, you've also been mentoring people who are not your own children.
Yes.
Around what kind of impact they can make. Do you feel like your personal and professional, mixing those two things sort of together, the legacy that you're trying to build has to do with mentorship and impact? How would you state it?
Yeah, I think, the way I think about how I, again, show up as a coach and a mentor and a visionary for others, people's lives in terms of what they want to accomplish and what kind of impact they want to have. So I think it's been an evolution, but it's an orientation toward how can I bring my gifts? We talked about earlier, a big part, I think, of our contribution is how we use our gifts, and how we bring them forward for the benefit of others. That's the way I think about it. And so my days, in terms of the time that I spend working, are really about that. Who can I show up for? How can I show up for them? How can I bring them a vision of who they can be that they may not have, or may have roadblocks that are getting in the way? So therefore the coaching and the mentoring part, and then therefore the visioning part in relationship to people who I believe we all come here as potential.
Indeed.
And then it is, well, how do we maximize potential? And I realize without other people who are coach-minded, mentor-minded, and vision-minded, we limit our potential. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. One of the questions that I like to ask is, what personal progress do you feel like you've made over your lifetime that you're most proud of, that is sort of allowing you now to kind of live a life of purpose and hopefully, leaving a legacy? Where did you start and where are you now? How would you describe that progress in yourself?
No, that's a great question. Well, again, part of this was I did not have a spiritual framework or belief system that worked in my life. And at 40, I would call it, I had my midlife crisis, which included a kind of
Ice cream?
there was ice cream involved, because first it included, it started with me having to go to the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack while I was at my real work, my job. And in that moment, having my assistant literally put me in the car, take me to the hospital, And for 48 hours, I was hooked up to, wires and things trying to determine whether or not, hey, I was having a heart attack. And in that experience, I realized something has to change and something's missing. My wife, who had a rooted faith, again, here I didn't have one at all, who modeled for me what that looked like, started really thinking about, researching, investigating what it was that I actually believed, and how I might need to start believing if I were going to change my life. Because I felt like at that midlife crisis moment, the doctors came back and just said, you weren't having a heart attack. We'll just say it was burnout, right? Burnout, this overriding semantic thing that you go, okay, well, how do I fix that? There's a lot of different things you need to do. Go, here's a prescription for what we can give you, and then you go figure out the rest. But with that being said, right, the greatest lesson is that the spirit side is an important part to develop if you want to have a full life, if you want to maximize your potential. And in that path from there on, my study and my adoption of my belief system around what I believe God represents and who he is in my life is clear. I have great clarity of what that is, where I had no interest and therefore no clarity back when I was now having this midlife burnout experience.
Wow. Wow. And how has that progression of having a rich inner spiritual life contributed to the work that you're doing and the legacy that you're building?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is it's everything because, the underlying principle is this idea of dying of self where, and again, even saying it, it's like, okay, well, how do you do that? And there's that, and what's the benefits of doing that? That's horrible. It sounds horrible. But the concept of the dying of self, which is just, right, of being there as a vessel for others, allowing what it is that you have and all the blessings that come along with it to overflow in the lives of other people. And so every time I'm thinking about trying to show up, and by the way, I don't do it all the time. And I, quite frankly, there are times where I go, I'm still not doing that very well. But the intention is to try and show up for other people in the way that they would, like me to show up for them. And I'm always trying to get better at that. The hardest part for me in doing that is to do that specifically. And again, I think this is kind of God's sense of humor for my wife. Like, how do I continue to show up and be better for her in the way that she needs me to be better for her? And of all of the people in my life where I think I still don't do that very well, which is why this whole thing is mind-boggling. But in my work part, the part where I'm showing up, coaching and mentoring others, and now actually showing up in a community, a very specific, disinvested, under-resourced community to try and show up in that way, I'm finding it a great challenge. And so it's what gets me up each day enthusiastic about today's another opportunity to grow and get better.
Wow. This might seem like a really, dark question, but let's take it as a great, bright opportunity. If you were to sort of write like the first 3 sentences or 4 or 5 sentences of your obituary, meaning you had control over it, you do, what would you want it to say if someone else was writing about you and they were saying, this is who Mark was in his lifetime? What would you want the first 4 sentences to say about you?
Yeah, I think, again, it sounds really simple, but in the word good, he was a good man. I think that would be the first sentence. I think that the intent, again, is to be good.
Yeah.
And wanting to be a good man. I think that's the first thing that drives me.
Mm.
I think in being a good man, again, it seems too simplistic, but he was a good father in that. And then in that part is the part that I hope, again, my children would be saying about dad, in that, he helped me see who I could become when I couldn't see it myself. And in that, he came alongside me to help me become that. That would be the second thing that I would think of. And then the third one would be that he had vision for people outside of, again, self and family that help them right now tell their story about the legacy that they're now leaving for their generations. And I hope that, again, he was an impetus for that. He was a catalyst for me, meaning others, getting on their path to have influence and impact in the lives of the people that they love and care about.
Wow.
And I love that question because it seems like one that you go, that's one we should all be thinking about all the time. And I've never actually thought about it until you asked it to me, but I guess I have thought about it.
Seems like you think about it in different ways all the time, right? I mean,
That's a great question, Jamie. I've never thought about that, but maybe I have been thinking about that.
I think you've been
But
thinking
thank you
about
for
it.
allowing me to articulate it.
My pleasure. Now, you know, it's funny, like the people that we, Ray, your father-in-law, and the people that we look to and have looked to, we think about them at different phases. You actually only knew him for 8 years, right? That was like the 8-year window, but he had a huge impact.
Yeah.
And, with our parents or, parents-in-law, we think of them sort of at certain moments, like certain age expression of them
Yes. Right.
is what we hold in our minds, right?
Right.
We sort of know, okay, he was also getting sick and we were, on his deathbed with the ice cream, but I kind of think of him as like the dude on the ranch. So whatever iteration of him that comes to mind here, I'm wondering if you hold that in your mind, that image of him, and you had a chance where he like literally we're getting off of this, recording today with each other, and he just walks in this living room that you're in. You picture what he's wearing, maybe he has a cowboy hat on, we don't know.
Yeah.
And he sat down and you had the chance to tell him something.
Yeah.
What would you want to tell him?
Well, that's exactly kind of where we started, which was thank you for embodying strength as a man and showing me what that looks like in the true sense of showing up for others. Again, in that mind and body and spirit of loving, but in loving in the way that you love because of the who you are designed and purposed to be. And I've taken that as again, construct, for lack of a better word, into my life. And I just want to thank you for that. And hopefully I've, as a result, again, kind of made you proud.
Yeah. We're sending it out. I think he heard it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it has, again, me thinking as you asked that question, right? Back to intention, I'm here. I have the opportunity to engage the people that I care about and I love in these kinds of conversations. And I think back to the point about, how we met at a wealth conference, in essence, where people are there, again, all trying to be good stewards of their wealth. And I think, the natural pull is in that realm of money and finances. To me, our lives are to be stewarded, and that's just a component of it. And in fact, I believe it's a very small component of it when we think about, how long we might be here on earth. What is it that we've been given, and how is it that we're sharing it, with others in a meaningful way? And so that's the orientation that I'm trying to bring to what it means to be quote unquote wealthy. And in my mind, what it means to be is to be a person that embodies things that then they can give to others for their benefit.
Thank you so much for bringing that frame to something that is so often simplified and kind of dumbed down, I think. Really the holistic view of what is real wealth, right?
Yeah.
And that is the thing that gets wrong. And then, of course, what we teach our children is skewed off of that, right?
Very much so.
So thank you so much for representing that.
My pleasure.
It's been a total delight. I will just say that my father is from Green Bay, Wisconsin, so I will hold Ray
Wow, cool. How great is that?
forever. And I will have to tell my aunties who still live in Green Bay. You won't believe who I got to talk to. So thanks so much for sharing, Ray, but really for sharing yourself in this conversation. It's really been
My pleasure. Thanks for giving me the forum, Jamie. Pete, Thank you for creating this environment. I think it's wonderful. It's amazing. I felt like I had the chance to just be authentic and put my heart forward regardless of what words came out of my mouth. So thank you for creating this environment. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Who We Remember. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to subscribe. When you subscribe, a new episode will pop up automatically in your favorite listening platform every 2 weeks. You can see some great photos related to today's story, as well as find out more about our guests and their work. Just go to storykeep.com/podcast. Who We Remember is a production of StoryKeep. StoryKeep works with exceptional individuals and families to document their life stories and histories through films and private podcasts. You can learn more about our services at storykeep.com.